I've got some pretty fascinating updates to the Battle of Suggs. Basically, if you look at the Wikipedia page, you can see continuing violence and that there was a battle between Buffalo soldiers and a town called Arvada, and just outside of this town was a town that's now vanished called Suggs. And the geography is basically, as the railroad was coming through, Suggs developed as a sort of tent town. And about 4 miles south, they had a military post called Camp Benton's.
The Powder River is pretty wide there, and the Powder River is a pretty treacherous river because there's a lot of sand and quicksand. So you just can't just build a bridge across and think it's going to stay. And then in the wintertime it freezes over, and as the water comes up, it builds up big ice. Then when the ice goes off, it'll take out the bridges, and it does that quite often. But anyhow, when the railroad came, it had to wait there on the east side of the Powder River, so a little railroad town called Suggs boomed up, and it's an end of the trail railroad town, which actually has all the worst elements you can think of. You had brothels, and you have gamblers, and you have gun shootouts. But during the Johnson County War, they sent 2 regiments, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry, to, it was called Camp Benton. It was 4 miles south of Suggs.
And Camp Benton's and Suggs themselves, Suggs was a railroad town. It was only meant to be there until the railroad continued, and then Suggs would basically move with the railroad. But because the Powder River was right there, they decided to erect a fort just in case the Indian Wars kicked back off.
And this is where Suggs was.
And they stationed black cavalrymen there. They stationed Buffalo soldiers. Well, 3 of these Buffalo soldiers decided to disobey the order not to cross the bridge and not to go into the railroad town. They disobeyed this, they went in there. And in the town you've got liquor, you've got prostitutes, sex workers. It's a lawless town.
And the reason why they sent them there, because they sent them there to keep the unrest between the homesteaders and the ranchers. Well, it ended up 3 of these Buffalo soldiers, they thought they weren't supposed to leave camp. They were supposed to stay where they were at. So anyhow, they decided they wanted to go down and get a little nookie and have a little drink. Well, the locals didn't cater to that going down there. So they had a little shootout, and actually 2 of the black soldiers got killed and 1 got wounded. The battle took place as they were going back to the camp, and that would be 4 miles straight south on the Powder River. And at that time, the town of Arvada did not exist.
And where do you think the soldiers were buried?
They were buried on a kind of a horseshoe bend, and it was actually on state land. Through the years, that has washed wider and wider and worse where the camp existed way. For that, you could at one time even find at the firing range, you could find bullets and stuff. But that was one of the things they always had to go shooting every week.
Well, they go back to the fort, and apparently they muster 20 of their troops to come back into town, and it's almost a race war. Now, this is where history gets very murky because the official report doesn't detail any of this, but I met kind of an eccentric lady drinking in her hometown. She was in her 90s, and she tells me that it was the black soldiers who were rallying their troops, and they were about to go massacre the town, and the white officers executed 2 of them. And I didn't think much of it until we got back to this museum here, and there is documentation saying that 2 black soldiers were buried at Camp Benton's. Now, it was different dates, and it was different causes. Apparently 1 black soldier was at the firing range, and a cowboy came up and said, "Hey, can I shoot?" And the black soldier says, "Sure, go ahead." And he kind of just stands there for a minute, and he says, "Are you going to shoot?" And the cowboy says, "Yeah," and he shoots the black soldier.
Yeah, so the lady in town was saying that the 2 soldiers were killed by their commanding officers trying to go into town and solve a dispute, but Private Willis Johnson died, basically in that riot or that scuffle, but Brown died just by a cowboy trapper or scout stopped by the rifle range and asked if he could shoot. They said yes and waited for a shot. He didn't shoot, so one soldier supposedly, Brown said, when are you going to shoot? And the man shot the soldier. Wow. Wow.
So he's buried alongside the other soldier, I believe Private Johnson, and eventually the Powder River changes course and washes the graves out. But probably locals were talking about the fact that there's two graves right next to each other from the same year, because the fort lasted for 7 months of the same year, and they surmised that they knew that there was a pretty large battle and that 20 black soldiers did come into the town. They probably put two and two together and mixed the stories up, and you have a little bit of embellishment, and before you know it, there's the story of a borderline race war.
Well, they were actually buried where the camp was. But this is over, well, now it's 125 years ago or more. And since then, the river's changed channels and washed where the camp used to be out, and they buried them under a couple cottonwood trees, and they put their initials in the cottonwood trees. Well, since then, the cottonwood trees have died and are gone. And probably, I don't know exactly where, probably the bodies or what's left of them got washed away too. Okay, here's Camp Benton's right here, and here is the trees, the names of the trees. Johnson was the one that killed. He was killed in 1892. But that's it, and then so that tells about Camp Bentham's there. If you want whatever you want to take. And Kathleen, this is a tour they took. And I don't know what year this was.
Oh, they have rifle pits. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that lady in town was talking about.
Mm-hmm. See, it's from June 1892 to November.
It didn't last long.
7 months. There was no battle. It was just a shootout there when these three Buffalo soldiers came to Suggs, and there was a battle. So I don't know where the battle came from. There is quite a bit. There's a couple of places I've read about the inquiries when they had the investigation.
So it looks like there was just war in the town pretty often. That's like hole in the wall.
Yeah, I mean I should take that home and read it, because I haven't really read all the stories about it, but I just kind of knew.
Keep talking about Camp Benton's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also Tom Gardner caught a 3-pound catfish. I'm going to go interview him about that.
And here's somebody who recalls some of the saga of the Suggs town. That was in the 60s there, that article.
Well, it's so crazy to see so much about Suggs collected, and then you Google it, and there's almost nothing.
Yeah. And of course, it's old history, nobody. But you goes to the newspapers, you'll hear. Of course, the newspapers, again, they don't know the whole truth. They're just reporting what was told.
Oh, and this is the only thing I can really find online. I've seen this everywhere.
Have you? Okay.
I wonder if this guy's still around.
But I remember reading when they did the investigation of what they came up with. But I can't remember where I read that at.
I'm sure you could request it from a military records department.
Yeah, somebody would have it. In the night. Boy, they embellished that.
Oh, they still embellish it down there. That one woman in Arvada was saying that it was basically a coup and the white commanding officers killed 2 black soldiers.
Is that what she said?
She did.
Oh, I never heard that before.
But they died on separate dates, and one of them, he got shot by basically an outlaw. Yeah. But this is the official report for the Department of the Platte, which I don't think the department lasted that long, did it?
I don't know.
And that's where...
And I know I've read this annual report of Secretary of State, 1892.
Same woman actually told me that she was an educator, and in her younger years she met the fiance of Nate Champion. And according to her, Nate Champion never rustled cattle, and the fiance was still able to produce a promise ring that Nate Champion gave her.
They moved the county line. Arvada used to be in Johnson County,
Yeah.
apparently.
And Sheridan County in 1888 became Sheridan County, and it all came from Johnson County.
Is there a reason that they changed it? Was there a county seat
Well,
war?
as the population increased, they divided up. I think 1911 was the last time they created the final counties, and I can't remember. I think there was 3 or 4 of them then, and that included the 23 counties. But there's some counties are pretty good size.